then the Chevy Sonic was actually way more fun than I expected. Everybody kept saying, you're not gonna believe us, but you're gonna have a ton of fun in that car. So back in 2012, I was playing Forza Motorsport 4. And I absolutely adored it. And you could make these servers on Forza Motorsport 4 where you can name it like Lamborghini only server or, insert brand tier server. And I made essentially that. I made a Lamborghini server. Some people came in and we became friends. So we started talking for a few months and he goes, hey, have you ever been to the Woodward Dream Cruise? I go, I don't even know what that is. Where is it? He goes, Detroit. Basically, without even thinking, young and dumb, a month later, never met these people. I drove up and I stayed with them. So I took the road trip from Virginia all the way to Michigan and stayed with these guys, and they had a Cobalt SS. And they also had a Saturn Ion Redline. And they also had a Dodge Charger SRT 8. So kind of a cool mix of everything. And I had my 2013 Mustang GT. It was brand new at the time. So it was really cool to take my first road trip in this car. So I took the road trip. Charger's purple. My car's bright blue. Cobalt's a bright blue. It's just a great time. And I go, hey, who did the work on the Cobalt? Because it had this really loud supercharger whine. It was not the turbo one, which would go on to kind of be known as the better one. It was the supercharged Cobalt SS, the first gen. And they said this company called ZZ Performance, or ZZP. And they're in Grand Rapids, Michigan. I'm like, oh, that's cool. I didn't realize people worked on Ecotechs like this, which if you don't know, Ecotech is essentially the 4-cylinder performance platform by Chevy. So it would be, say, in a Pontiac Solstice Turbo, a Saturn Sky Redline, Saturn Ion Redline, they all have the same engine. So I didn't really think much of it. I just learned about the company, and it just went in my back pocket of my brain for years. And I was like, yeah, I guess if I ever built an Ecotech or did stuff with Ecotech, I would hit this company up. And lo and behold, basically a decade goes by, and I ended up working with the Peterson Auto Museum, and I big turbo swapped Rob Deerdeck's Chevy Sonic that he jumped backwards. And I was like, wait, who works on these? Oh, wait, what was that brand called again? ZZ? That's right. So I email ZZP, tell them what I'm doing. They go, yeah, we'd love to help. So they gave me some discounts and parts, which was super helpful. We did a video for them, put everything on it, and then moved on. Didn't really think much of it, but Tyler at ZZP was super nice. We exchanged emails a lot. They said, hey, I know you guys probably have some really niche and weird stuff. Is there any chance I can maybe fly up sometime and film a bunch of your guys' cars? He goes, yeah, that sounds like a cool idea, but we're in Michigan, it snows here, and it's gonna be a while. So fast forward all the way to October of 2022, the time's finally come, said, hey, we'd love to have you up. So I flew up to Grand Rapids, and it's beautiful outside. Autumn leaves, colorful. Michigan in the fall is absolutely stunning. I get there, and they just have everything lined up. They had a bunch of different cars, but the big ones were a bigger turbo Chevy Sonic that made like 300 wheel horsepower. Then they had a Cobalt SS that made 650 horsepower. A Camaro 2-liter 4-cylinder of the newer generation, but with a big turbo on it. So that made like 440 horsepower. And then they also had a Polaris Slingshot with 4 wheels on it. So they used the Camaro diff, then changed it to a drive shaft drivetrain rather than the belts. They kept trying to use the belts, they kept snapping. So they went to 4 wheels on this. It made 550 horsepower. And then finally, they had 2 more cars. They had a Pontiac GXP, which was the LS motor, but front wheel drive. Very strange, like LS4, I believe. Nobody builds them because the transmissions are really weak. I was like, okay, I'll drive that. And lastly, a Buick Regal with a big turbo on it. Those cars originally came with superchargers on it, which is super weird to think. But a lot of people kind of say the Buick Regal wasn't the first sleeper, but it's almost credited as like the one that a lot of people think of. Like the Taurus SHO back in like 94, and then there was the Buick Regal that had a supercharger on the V6 for some reason. So amazing lineup. But the ones that really stuck out, I would say, were the Cobalt SS, which torque steered like crazy. They call it Snowbolt. The Snowbolt was bananas. I mean, you had to really plan your accelerations and kind of have it dance back and forth and just kind of let it happen. So when you get in it, it would just kind of do this number every single time. Then the Chevy Sonic was actually way more fun than I expected. Everybody kept saying, you're not going to believe us, but you're going to have a ton of fun in that car. I said, okay. So I drove it out. It's on rotiforms, like nice wheels, good livery on it. Take it on the exit ramp the first time, and it was a blast. I mean, you'd get on it, it would spin tires a little bit, and then just hook up and go. No torque steer, just went dead straight, and you could just rack through the gears. I never thought that a manual Chevy Sonic with a big turbo would be fun, and it was. But then it was time for the Slingshot. And the Slingshot, I say, is one of the most unique driving experiences I've ever had, because the normal Slingshot, I lived with one for a week. Polaris emailed me and emailed me and emailed me. They said, hey, can we please let you borrow a Slingshot? And I said no for a while because I didn't really think my audience would be that interested in it. But finally, I was like, whatever, fine. So I borrow this Slingshot, drive it around, go into the mountains of Georgia, do all this crazy stuff in it, go through a drive-through in it, get people's reactions. Come to find out, people really like the video, which is pretty funny. So I was like, okay, let's do this one. So fully upgraded, 550 wheel horsepower in a Slingshot. Turbocharged, same internal turbo that you find on all the other stuff. It was an older generation Slingshot because those also use the Ecotec engine, but they are naturally aspirated, I believe. So they just boosted it. So like E85 powered, got in, and there's no door, there's no anything. You just get in, it's plastic center console, and you're just like, well, I guess this is happening. So got on it, and it just does this. But thankfully, it spun in like a fun way. It wasn't scary. It was just really fun. So every time you got on it, you were gonna have a riot, right? You're just gonna go really fast. It would spin, but it would spin very straight. And ZZP did a ton of research on this kit that they were developing, because some people did a four-way conversion, but the front wheels and the rear wheels weren't the same length, so it kind of made it all wonky. ZZP made sure that all the dimensions were perfect. It basically turned it into a car, right? And when you got on it every single time, it felt safe. It didn't feel like something that dangerous, but it did feel pretty wild, I'm not gonna lie, because I remember I had to turn my hat backwards because it kept flying up and all this other stuff, and people's reactions were great. Finally, it was time for the Buick Regal Turbo, and that one I was extraordinarily excited for because I've always heard really good things about these Buick Regals. Like, David, you're going to love it. It's just like the GTP, the Pontiac GTP, which used the same motor, same blower, same everything. Go, okay, sounds good. When they put a turbo on this car, its quarter mile time decreased by a full second. They did a beefy supercharger system on it. It did almost nothing in comparison to the turbo. Threw the turbo on it, and it did everything I wanted it to do. It went dead straight. It was insanely fun to kind of like catch it a little bit. Yeah, I made 400 horsepower, 400 wheel in this tiny little Buick. And it was quiet. That was the hard part about getting it on camera, was that you could barely hear the turbo on camera. So I had to put a GoPro literally on like where the wastegate was to kind of get that sensation. But yeah, people loved it, got tons of views, and I think it's because in the comments, it's like, oh, my dad had one. Like, it was very relatable. And then there was the big Turbo Camaro. The big Turbo Camaro was interesting because they basically built this car as a response to the Ford Mustang EcoBoost. And the Mustang EcoBoost is a pretty torquey engine. I mean, you can do like a tune and get like almost 400 torque out of this thing. They're great. They're fun. They kind of fall on their face though because the turbo is so small. So you get lots of bottom end, but not a lot of top end. But the Camaro, guess what? Same thing. Had lots of torque down low, but fall on its face. Therefore, ZZP said, let's build the motor and throw this turbo on. And they did, and it made over 400 wheel, and it was really weird. I mean, it was really weird that you're in this Okay, the Camaro's claustrophobic, let's be honest. I mean, the roof is low, the visibility sucks, and that's always been my number one criticism of the Camaro. It's like, I know it's a cop-out, but if you're driving this thing every day, it sucks. I mean, you can't see anything. But I'm sitting this low, and every time I shift, you're expecting the of that V8, and you're going, choo, and you're like, what is happening right now? It almost feels like 30 years down the road, they made a Grand National. I think that's the best way I could describe it. It's like GM revived the Grand National. It made 400 horsepower. It'd probably not be as like big turbo, but ZZP made this amazing kit. It drove fantastic. Everything felt great. Everything built by ZZP that I drove was stout. Everything felt like it was not going to break. So it made me really impressed that they took this 4-cylinder that almost no one talks about, which is really fascinating because the Cobalt land and the Ion Redline land, they're kind of in their own world, right? They kind of know so much about these engines. I would go on to drive a big blower Ion Redline later, and it was a ton of fun. But the Ecotech, in my opinion, is now very underrated. Now that I've gotten to experience it and see what they're all about, I get it now.
By now you know that Auto Tempest is the best place to shop for your next car because they compile all the results from all the major listing sites into one place. And of course they support the best car content on YouTube. But did you also know that Auto Tempest now has a new mobile app? That's right, in addition to using it in your browser on a computer, you can also have it for iOS or Android in the palm of your hand. So check it out and download it. I know you'll love it the way I love it, and leave them a great review.